West Berlin, January 1988. Snow drifts silently through the night, settling on empty streets and dimly lit buildings in a city split not just by concrete, but by ideology. Beneath this calm surface, one of Europe's longest intelligence hunts is about to reach its end. For more than 6 years, a single gunman had haunted Jewish communities across the continent. He did not plant bombs. He did not shout slogans. He arrived unseen, fired with surgical precision, and vanished before authorities even understood what had happened. Intelligence agencies across Europe knew him by a name that carried equal parts fear and frustration. The Red Wolf. Israeli intelligence had been tracking the trail he left behind since the early 1980s, a trail marked not by explosions, but by carefully chosen shots fired from concealed positions. Vienna, Paris, Brussels, different cities, same signature. Victims struck during moments of normalcy, prayer, dinner, cultural gatherings. Each attack precise, controlled, and devastating. The file that first unified these crimes landed in Tel Aviv in the summer of 1982. Inside were photographs no analyst could study without pause, shattered synagogue windows, blood-stained restaurant floors, bullet trajectories mapped with chilling consistency. The conclusion was unavoidable. This was not random violence. This was a professional. Unlike most militant attacks of the era, there were no intercepted supply chains, no bomb-making materials, no chatter to exploit. The Red Wolf operated alone during execution. No accomplices to arrest. No communications to trace. Just silence before and after each strike. What made him uniquely dangerous was not just ideology, but discipline. Analysts concluded that the shooter possessed formal sniper training, patience measured in hours, and a deep understanding of urban terrain. He selected positions that allowed clear firing lines and multiple escape routes. By the time police arrived, he was already crossing borders. Slowly, a profile emerged. The Red Wolf was believed to be aligned with secular revolutionary movements rather than religious extremism, part of the Marxist-Leninist wave that influenced certain Palestinian factions during the Cold War. His actions suggested access to training far beyond what militant camps in the Middle East could provide. That suspicion would eventually prove correct. The man behind the code name was born Mahmoud Khalid Hassan in 1953 in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. His early life unfolded amid displacement, violence, and political radicalization. As a teenager, he joined the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, where instructors quickly noticed something unusual. He was calm under pressure, methodical, and unerringly detached. Those traits caught the attention of foreign trainers. During the 1970s, Hassan was selected for advanced instruction in Eastern Europe. For nearly 18 months, he trained inside the German Democratic Republic under instructors tied to state security services. There, he learned the science of precision killing, wind calculation, elevation, concealment, escape planning, and most critically emotional control. By the time he returned to active operations, he was no longer just a militant. He was a weapon. His first confirmed strike came in Vienna in 1981. From a concealed position overlooking a synagogue, he fired multiple rounds into the building during Sabbath services, killing and wounding worshippers before disappearing across borders within hours. At the time, authorities treated it as an isolated incident. They wouldn't make that mistake again. By early 1982, a second attack in Paris followed the same pattern. Then Brussels. Different countries, identical execution. Ballistics began to align. Witness descriptions overlapped. Intelligence agencies finally recognized what they were facing, not a network, but a single, highly trained individual moving freely across Europe. For Mossad, the challenge was unprecedented. You cannot infiltrate a lone operative. You cannot flip his accomplices, if he has none, and you cannot wait for mistakes from someone trained never to make them. The Red Wolf had built his entire existence around invisibility, but even ghosts leave shadows, and by the mid-1980s, Israeli intelligence would begin searching not for man himself, but for the systems he could not live without. By 1982, Israeli intelligence knew one thing with certainty. The Red Wolf was real, and he wasn't going to stop on his own. What they didn't know was who he actually was. The early investigations produced patterns but no names. Ballistics confirmed the same shooter. Witnesses describe a man who blended effortlessly into crowds. No fingerprints. No abandoned weapons. No intercepted messages. The Red Wolf existed only through the damage he left behind. Traditional counterterrorism methods failed almost immediately. There were no bomb makers to trace, no courier routes to map, no safe houses being used repeatedly. The shooter didn't rely on local cells during execution. He arrived prepared, acted alone, and disappeared before support networks ever became visible. To Mossad analysts, this suggested something unsettling. The man had been trained to operate exactly like an intelligence officer. That realization changed everything. Instead of hunting him as a militant, Mossad began treating the Red Wolf as a state-trained asset who had gone rogue into ideological violence. That meant his origins were likely buried not in open militant camps, but inside Cold War intelligence relationships. The first real shift came not from Israel's own sources, but from Europe that in late 1982. A quiet intelligence exchange took place between Israeli officers and their West German counterparts. Buried inside routine reporting was a small but crucial detail. Years earlier, East German authorities had hosted a select group of Palestinian militants for advanced training. Most names were known. One was not. This individual had disappeared from monitoring shortly after completing his course. His name was Mahmoud Khaled Hassan at AT First. The name meant nothing. He wasn't famous. He didn't appear in public statements. He wasn't linked to any known operation. But when analysts compared his training profile to the Red Wolf's attack methodology, the match was disturbing: advanced marksmanship, urban concealment, counter-surveillance, escape planning, psychological discipline IT fit too well to ignore. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. Mossad needed confirmation, and confirmation would take years. The next phase of the hunt was slow, frustrating, and deliberately quiet. Hassan wasn't confronted directly. Instead, intelligence focused on something far more subtle: the support ecosystem. Even the most independent operative needs help. False documents don't create themselves. Weapons don't cross borders alone. Money has to move carefully, indirectly. But inevitably, Hassan avoided exposure during attacks. But over time, he had to resurface somewhere to resupply, as Mossad stopped looking for the shooter and started watching everyone around him. Palestinian facilitators across Western Europe were placed under discreet surveillance: document forgers, financial couriers, logistics handlers. The idea wasn't to find Hassan directly, but to notice who behaved differently when he was nearby. For nearly 3 years, nothing surfaced. Then, in the autumn of 1985, a small anomaly appeared in Frankfurt. A known PFOP logistics contact met briefly with a man in a public space. No handshakes, no prolonged conversation. Less than 30 minutes. They walked separately afterward, but surveillance photographs told a different story. The man's posture, his age, his facial structure. Analysts compared the images to old photographs pulled from Lebanese archives. For the first time, Mossad had visual confirmation. Mahmoud Khaled Hassan was alive and still operating in Europe. That moment marked the first true breakthrough of the entire hunt. Yet even now, capture or elimination remained impossible. Hassan didn't stay. He didn't repeat routes. He didn't contact the same people twice in quick succession. By the time a response could be organized, he was already gone to in 1986. He surfaced briefly in Munich, detected through the same network surveillance. He vanished again before teams could reposition. A reported sighting in Amsterdam the following year collapsed when the source proved unreliable. The Red Wolf seemed to understand something critical. Movement was survival, but intelligence pressure was tightening. Intercepted communications among Palestinian leadership began referencing a valuable European asset whose protection was essential. Financial transfers small, carefully structured, started to show a repeating rhythm consistent with someone being maintained long-term. None of it named Hassan directly. But taken together, the picture was becoming undeniable to be why late 1987, Mossad analysts reached a consensus assessment. Mahmoud Khaled Hassan was the Red Wolf, and more importantly, he was planning something new. Signals suggested preparation for a high-impact operation, one that required symbolic visibility, one that would remind Europe and Israel that he was still active. That requirement narrowed the map dramatically. Only one city offered the combination of symbolism, complexity, and escape routes. He preferred a city divided by a wall to a city where he could strike in the west and vanish into the east: Berlin. Berlin was unlike any other city in Europe, to be why the late 1980s. It wasn't just a capital, it was a fault line, a place where two worlds touched but never mixed. For intelligence operatives, it was both a nightmare and an opportunity. And for a man like the Red Wolf, it was almost perfect. West Berlin offered crowded streets, international traffic, and high-value symbolic targets. East Berlin offered something even more valuable: sanctuary. Once across the wall, Western intelligence services could not legally follow. Jurisdiction ended. Surveillance collapsed. Hunters were forced to stop. For years, Mahmoud Khalid Hassan had exploited that reality. Signals intelligence in late 1987 began pointing in one direction. Communications among Palestinian leadership hinted at an upcoming operation tied to diplomatic activity. The language was cautious, but the implications were clear. A senior Israeli presence in Berlin was being studied. That was enough to trigger alarms in Tel Aviv. Mossad analysts revisited every confirmed sighting, every fragment of movement, every contact Hassan had made since 1985. A pattern finally emerged, one that had been invisible when examined city by city. Hassan didn't choose locations randomly. He favored environments where escape options were asymmetric, places where security forces were constrained by border politics or bureaucracy. Berlin was the ultimate expression of that strategy. The conclusion was unavoidable. He was planning another attack. Berlin was a staging ground. That assessment transformed a long-term hunt into an operational countdown. In December 1987, Mossad authorized a full surveillance deployment to West Berlin. The mission parameters were strict. No arrests, no exposure, no mistakes. The priority was confirmation where Hassan was, how he moved, and when he would become vulnerable. Winter conditions complicated everything. Snow covered the city, muffling footsteps and distorting visibility. Surveillance teams rotated constantly, battling cold that numbed hands and slowed reaction times. Observation posts had to be abandoned and relocated as visibility changed. Every adjustment increased risk, but winter also worked in Mossad's favor. Fewer pedestrians lingered outdoors. Movement stood out more clearly, and sound ironically traveled less. The breakthrough came not from Hassan himself, but from a man beneath him, a known PFLP logistics handler, long monitored but never confronted, arrived in Berlin in early January 1988. His travel pattern was cautious, indirect, and expensive, classic signs of an important meeting. Surveillance followed him to a residential building in the Charlottenburg district. The location was immediately concerning. IT sat within West Berlin, but offered multiple routes toward crossing points into the east. It was close enough to high-value targets to support reconnaissance, but positioned for rapid disappearance if pressure appeared. Exactly the kind of place Hassan would choose. Observation teams established discreet coverage of the building. Days passed. No obvious visitors. No calls placed. No visible routines that would expose the occupant. Then, subtle indicators began to accumulate. Movement inside the apartment always solitary. Lights switching on and off at irregular intervals. No deliveries. No trash taken out. The telephone line remained unused. This wasn't normal residential behavior. Technical surveillance, carefully deployed from adjacent structures, confirmed it. A single occupant. Disciplined. Minimal movement. No electronic communication. The assessment was clear. The Red Wolf was inside. But knowing his location wasn't enough. If Hassan sent surveillance, he would vanish possibly across the wall within minutes. The window for action would be brief, and it would come on his terms, not theirs. Mossad planners face a dilemma. Move too early and risk exposure without certainty. Wait too long and risk losing him forever. They needed something Hassan couldn't resist. Fortunately, intelligence suggested he was already committed. Intercept indicated that final reconnaissance for an attack was imminent. Hassan would have to leave the apartment. He would have to move through public space. And he would have to do it alone. That was a vulnerability. Operational teams began rehearsing scenarios built around one assumption. The moment Hassan stepped outside, the clock would start. Routes were mapped. Escape corridors identified. Decision points to find locations where he could still reach the east and places where he couldn't. The mission parameters were adjusted accordingly. This would not be a raid. It would not be an arrest. It would be a street-level interception designed to end the threat instantly before Hassan could cross an invisible line that no operative could follow on the evening of January 15th, 1988, surveillance detected movement. After 3 days inside the apartment, the door opened. Mahmoud Khalid Hassan stepped out into the snow, and for the first time in 6 years, the Red Wolf was no longer hiding. The moment Mahmoud Khalid Hassan stepped onto the street, the operation shifted from waiting to motion. Surveillance teams didn't react with urgency. There were no sudden movements, no hurried radio calls. Everything unfolded exactly as rehearsed. Hassan had survived for years by detecting panic and disruption. The absence of both was deliberate. Snow lined the sidewalks, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights. West Berlin felt unusually quiet for a winter evening, the cold keeping most people indoors. Footsteps were few. Vehicles passed at predictable intervals. Conditions were almost ideal. Hassan moved with the awareness of someone who expected to be watched, his head turned in measured arcs. He glanced at reflections in shop windows. He crossed the street without obvious reason, then doubled back classic surveillance detection routes. Anyone following too closely would have been exposed within minutes. But he wasn't being followed by amateurs. Mossad operatives maintained distance, rotating coverage so no single person remained in his visual field long enough to register as a threat. The movement looked organic, pedestrians coming and going. Nothing more. A.S. Hassan walked toward the Kurfürstendamm, Berlin's main boulevard. The stakes escalated. From here, multiple routes led east. If he reached certain intersections, the operation would be aborted. No exceptions. The team could not risk a failed attempt that alerted him to their presence. A missed opportunity would likely mean losing him forever. Assault elements began to reposition. Point 2 operatives moved independently, approaching from opposite sides of Hassan's projected path. Their clothing blended into the city. No visible weapons. No gestures that would attract attention. Their timing was calculated to converge only when escape options narrowed. Hassan turned into a side street. That decision sealed it. The street was narrow, partially snow-covered, and shielded from the main road's noise. Light was uneven. Foot traffic was minimal. Most importantly, the geometry of the space reduced Hassan's ability to maneuver. The team leader gave a single coded confirmation. This was a point of no return. The approach was calm, almost casual. The operatives closed the distance from 2 angles, ensuring that Hassan's attention would split too late to react effectively. The snow absorbed sound. Their footsteps blended into the ambient noise of the city. The final moment. Hassan understood. Years of training allowed him to process the situation instantly, but recognition came too late. His body reacted, but there was no viable direction to move, no time to draw a weapon, no space to escape. The confrontation lasted seconds. What followed was not a chase, nor a struggle that spilled into the street. It was controlled, decisive, and final. Witnesses later struggled to describe what they had heard. Some recalled muffled sounds, others nothing at all. When Hassan fell, the snow beneath him darkened. The operatives did not linger. Point 1 confirmed the outcome. Another scanned the surroundings. A third element, positioned farther out, monitored for any unexpected movement or response. Everything occurred within a tightly defined window. 90 seconds after the first approach. The team began withdrawal. They separated immediately, moving along pre-planned routes that blended into pedestrian traffic. No vehicles waited nearby. No centralized extraction point existed. Each operative became indistinguishable from the city within moments. By the time local residents reported a possible disturbance, the street was empty. German police arrived approximately 40 minutes later. They found a body lying in the snow. Identification documents indicating a Lebanese national traveling under an assumed name. There was no weapon nearby. No witnesses who could provide a clear account. Only questions. For West Berlin authorities, the scene suggested a targeted killing, but nothing pointed to who had carried it out or how. The professionalism of the act was evident, but its authors had erased themselves. Within intelligence circles, however, confirmation moved quickly. Channels between German federal intelligence and Israeli counterparts verified what the documents did not. The man found in the snow was Mahmoud Khalid Hassan. The Red Wolf was dead. The operation that had taken years to prepare had concluded in less than 2 minutes. For Mossad, the priority shifted immediately from execution to silence. No statements. No claims. No confirmation. The The success of the mission depended as much on ambiguity afterward as precision during the act. Officially, the case will remain unsolved. Unofficially, its meaning was clear. The threat that had eluded every conventional method had been removed not through chance, but through patience, adaptation, and timing. The moment Hassan stepped into that side street, the years-long hunt collapsed into a single irreversible outcome. Snow continued to fall as police secured the area by morning. It would erase the last visible traces of what had happened. By the next morning, West Berlin had already moved on. Snowplows cleared the streets. Commuters returned to routine. The narrow side road where Mahmoud Khaled Hassan collapsed looked no different from any other winter morning in the city. Whatever had happened there the night before left no obvious trace. Officially, authorities treated the incident as a homicide. German police followed procedure statements were taken, timelines reconstructed, forensic reports filed. The documents found on the body identified the victim as a Lebanese national, using travel papers that appeared legitimate at first glance. There were no witnesses who could describe attackers with certainty. No surveillance footage. No usable leads. Within days, investigators understood what they were facing. This was not an ordinary crime. The efficiency, the lack of evidence, and the precision of the encounter all pointed toward professional involvement. Yet there was nothing that could be proven in court. No suspects to question. No diplomatic channels that would yield admissions. The case would remain open on paper. Behind closed doors, however, the reality was already known. German federal intelligence quietly confirmed the victim's true identity through liaison channels. When Israeli counterparts verified that Mahmoud Khaled Hassan was the individual long suspected of orchestrating sniper attacks across Europe, the tone of the investigation changed. The matter shifted from law enforcement to geopolitics. Publicly, the German government expressed concern over an apparent extrajudicial killing on its soil. Privately, officials understood the implications. Hassan had been responsible for attacks that German authorities themselves had been unable to prevent or resolve. His death eliminated a threat that had embarrassed multiple security services, and no formal protest followed. The investigation continued just long enough to satisfy legal obligations, then quietly stalled. Files were archived. Leads exhausted themselves. The case joined a category familiar to Cold War Europe incidents understood by everyone, acknowledged by no one inside Palestinian factions. The response was cautious. Statements mourned the loss of a fighter without elaborating on his role or operations. No specific attacks were claimed. No details were offered that might confirm Israeli intelligence assessments. The ambiguity was intentional. Acknowledging Hassan's activities openly would have validated years of accusations and exposed operational structures still in use. Within the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, his death was understood differently. Hassan had been a rare asset, not easily replaceable, not because of ideology, but because of capability. His training, discipline, and independence allowed operations that others could not replicate. Losing him meant more than losing a man. It meant losing an entire method of attack. That impact became visible quickly in the months following his death. Sniper-style attacks against Jewish targets in Europe dropped sharply. Security services noted the shift, but rarely stated the obvious conclusion. The threat hadn't evolved, it had been removed. For Mossad, the operation was considered a quiet success. There were no celebrations, no commendations that could be recorded. The individuals involved returned to other assignments, carrying with them knowledge that would shape future operations. What mattered wasn't just that Hassan had been eliminated, but how he had been found. The years-long strategy of monitoring support networks rather than chasing the operative directly had worked. The patience to wait for vulnerability, rather than forcing confrontation, proved decisive. Those lessons would be applied again. Inside intelligence assessments, the Berlin operation became a reference point of case study in dealing with adversaries who avoided communication, minimized exposure, and relied on movement for survival. Hassan had believed that discipline would protect him indefinitely. He was almost right. The broader geopolitical environment that had enabled his career was already beginning to collapse. Within 2 years, the Berlin Wall would fall. East Germany would dissolve. The sanctuary that had made the city so useful to him would cease to exist. History moved faster than anyone involved could have predicted. For the families of those killed in Vienna, Paris, and Brussels, news filtered through quietly. Some learned through unofficial channels, others through media speculation. There was no trial, no courtroom closure, only the understanding that the man responsible would not strike again. For some, that was enough. For others, it never could be. The city of Berlin absorbed the incident the way it had absorbed countless others during the Cold War without ceremony. The streets remained. The buildings remained. The violence became another unseen layer of history beneath daily life, and the Red Wolf faded into silence. The hunt for the Red Wolf ended quietly, but its meaning didn't. There was no announcement, no press conference, no official acknowledgement. The world simply became a little safer in a way most people would never notice. That was how intelligence victories often worked, invisible, unclaimed, and deliberately unfinished in public memory. Mahmoud Khalid Hassan vanished from headlines almost as quickly as it appeared in them. Yet within intelligence circles, the operation that ended his career became something else entirely, a reference point. For years, Hassan had represented a problem that modern counterterrorism struggled to solve. He was not part of a visible network. He did not communicate electronically. He did not repeat locations. He avoided patterns, avoided loyalty, avoided dependence. He understood surveillance because he had been trained by those who perfected it. What made his case exceptional wasn't just what he did, but how long he survived 0.6 years of operating inside Europe. Multiple attacks. No arrest. No exposure. No compromise. Until Berlin, the lesson was stark. Even the most disciplined operative cannot exist in total isolation. Independence reduces risk, but it does not eliminate it. At some point, every actor requires infrastructure, documents, money, weapons, shelter, and the moment an individual touches a system, that system becomes traceable. Mossad's success did not come from brilliance in a single moment, but from refusing to rush. Instead of chasing Hassan directly, they studied the environment that kept him alive. They mapped support networks patiently, without forcing outcomes. They accepted years of frustration as the cost of precision. When the opportunity finally appeared, it was undeniable and irreversible. That philosophy would reshape future operations. Targets who believed that silence protected them would later discover that absence itself creates patterns. Targets who believed movement guaranteed survival would learn that movement leaves trails. The Red Wolf's downfall wasn't caused by a mistake in execution, but by the unavoidable gravity of long-term logistics. There was also a broader historical irony. Hassan's rise had been enabled by Cold War politics, by a divided Europe where intelligence boundaries created safe havens. His training, mobility, and protection all depended on a world split into hostile camps. Within 2 years of his death, that world collapsed. The Berlin Wall fell. East Germany dissolved. Intelligence archives opened. Trainers became defendants. Sanctuaries disappeared. The geography Hassan relied on vanished almost overnight. Had he survived longer, his methods might become obsolete anyway. But history didn't wait. For the communities he terrorized, the Red Wolf's name faded, but the memory of his attacks remained. Synagogues repaired their windows. Restaurants reopened their doors. Cultural centers resumed their gatherings. Life continued not because fear vanished, but because it refused to win. That persistence mattered more than his death. Inside intelligence services, the Berlin operation reinforced an uncomfortable truth. Counterterrorism does not end violence, it interrupts it. Removing one threat creates space, not peace. Others would emerge with different ideologies, different methods, and different advantages. But each hunt added knowledge. Each success sharpened understanding, and each failure taught restraint. The Red Wolf believed his discipline made him untouchable. He believed that mastery of technique could overcome time. He believed patience belonged to him alone. He was wrong about one thing. His hunters were willing to wait longer. The snow that fell on Berlin in January 1988 melted like every winter before it. Streets returned to ordinary use. People walked paths unaware of what had unfolded there. The city moved forward, shedding layers of its past as it always had. The hunt ended not with spectacle but with silence. And in that silence, one truth remained. No matter how careful, no matter how skilled, no matter how.